Last week, shells landed 25 kilometres shy of the Polish border, and Russia has stated that they will open fire on Western supply convoys in Ukraine. So what's to stop him going further? He's been pushed into a corner with the Western sanctions, and UK intelligence suggests the Russian troops can only sustain operations for another 2 weeks. Is Putin getting desperate? And how long until this war spills over into other European nations? Do you, in fact, think that it will? How worried are you about this conflict escalating? The number here, 0345 6060 973. Joining me now is Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, a former NATO commander. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Nick.
So how likely, then, do you think it is that this conflict will spill over the border?
I don't think there's a chance of that, despite the fact we had very supportive visits by the Prime Ministers of Poland, Slovenia and the Czech Republic today to Ukraine. I think Putin has got quite enough to deal with right now without provoking the Western alliance into some sort of action.
That was a rather surprising thing that those leaders went to Ukraine. I mean, is there a sense that they're perhaps asking for it?
No, I think they're showing resolve and probably demonstrating to Putin that the Western alliance is probably a bit more resolute than he originally thought. I mean, it's a bit disappointing that they've done it in advance of NATO doing anything together. But in fact, I think all of them are thinking, well, we don't want to be the next victims. We better look pretty hard about it.
And what did you make of Zelensky saying today that his country, Ukraine, will not join NATO? Is that just restating the status quo, or is that a significant development?
That's quite a significant development, because that's one of the things that Putin says that he went to war over. So that's probably putting out public feelers. I mean, I don't agree with President Zelensky when he says that NATO countries are at risk next. I don't see that as part of President Putin's strategic plans right now. I think we have to understand that President Putin for years has written about the close hold that he wants to maintain on Belarus and Ukraine. And this is a particular obsession with him. And if, as we think, he's ill and maybe heading for the exit, he's just basically got himself absolved from any prosecution under the law, then he's obviously looking to his legacy, I would think.
Well, what you just described is perhaps even more worrying than if he was fit and well, because, I mean, if that's true, he's got nothing to lose.
Well, I think he's physically ill. I'm not sure his mental capacity is reduced. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. He's just miscalculated. I think he underestimated the extent to which the Russian people wouldn't support him. He underestimated the extent to which the Ukrainian people would welcome him. And I think he misjudged the mood of the NATO alliance and most of the countries of the world to what is outright aggression and a war crime against a neighbouring country.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, and this is the sort of the fear at the back of many people's minds, that if he is, shortly expecting to die anyway, then if he presses the big red button on the desk marked nuked, then it's not going to foreshorten his life much.
No, but I think we have to bear in mind, Nick, that there's a whole chain of command that goes down below Putin, and there's enough layers of people there who have kids and grandchildren to say, well, just a second. And unless President Putin himself has his finger on the button, nothing is going to fly without the chain of command actually implementing it. And I think there are people around Putin who wish to be his successor, or who want to survive and continue with the current rate of kleptocracy and autocracy there, who will probably stay his hand. He wants a peaceful retirement for as long as he's got. And what he needs to do is make sure the person who replaces him actually keeps him safe.
So I suppose we can take comfort in the fact that there is a human element in that chain, and it doesn't become automatic at a certain point. If he makes the order, it doesn't necessarily happen. People have to make a decision for themselves further down the line.
Oh, quite a lot of layers. In fact, one of the lessons they learned from the Cuban Missile Crisis is you can't delegate that power too low down. I mean, at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, they had the commanding officers of ships and submarines able, on their own decision and initiative, to release nuclear weapons. They've learned a lot from that, and it's very much like our chain of command. There are checks and balances at each stage to make sure there aren't any accidental or maniacal releases.
Now, there has been some positive... Are you okay?
Yeah, fine.
There has been some positive notes coming from the talks. Could they ever agree enough, do you think, to make peace? And what might compromise look like?
Well, it's going to be difficult, Nick. I think these are just sort of feelers and part of the tactical play. My sense is that Putin wants to have a final go at Kiev and also Odessa in order to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. If he achieves that, he'll want to freeze the conflict in the positions they're in now and hold that ground, I suspect. And also with Kiev having decapitated the government, effectively you've left Ukraine as a failed state because its government institutions and armed forces will have been smashed. So he'll want to, as I said, do that and occupy the bottom third of Ukraine. That used to be known as New Russia under Catherine the Great. And it's no coincidence last week that Putin made a speech in front of a statue of Catherine the Great. So I suspect he wants to freeze the conflict by occupying, as I said, the bottom third, including the Black Sea coast, and having knocked Kiev on the head. If he doesn't do that, I think he'll come to terms and look for a face-saving way out.
What do you make of the UK announcement that, well, it's not an announcement exactly, but there's this implication that Putin's troops can only fight for 2 more weeks?
Yeah, that may be true. The sort of cold season is starting to thaw now, and quite a lot of their armoured vehicles are getting bogged down in very muddy conditions. We have to remember they were out on the ground for about 2 months before they actually went in. So a lot of that equipment will be breaking down, the logistics chains will be fractured, and I think the morale of the troops is not very good indeed. I'm hearing of quite a lot of munition shortages where they're not able to use certain types of missiles and artillery shells because they're just running out of them. And that may be the case. My own belief is it's going to be a race between the Russian economy crashing and their military actually running out of steam.
You know, if it wasn't so serious, it might be almost comical. It's a sort of a Keystone Cops military advance in some cases, which is rather surprising considering how much money Russia is supposed to spend on its military. What have they been spending their money on, do you think? Yeah,
the problem is, Nick, the stuff that they've been spending their money on isn't there. Their best stuff, their Armata tanks and their T-90s are nowhere to be seen. And also quite a lot of their better combat aircraft and helicopters are not there. So it's almost as if they use their sort of second division stuff and save their first division stuff in case the NATO alliance reacted. I also think some of their better kit doesn't have a lot of armaments to go along with it. So it's quite interesting. They didn't put the Premier League stuff in, that's for sure.
Yeah, so what do you make of that? I mean, are they holding it, as you say, in reserve in case NATO attack, or do they have? Is this the first push to something bigger?
No, I don't think so. I think they thought they could do it with what they had around Ukraine. They do these practices every 18 months or so, either opposite the Baltic states or out in Mongolia, just to show they can do it. But it seems to me that they haven't had any real combined arms exercising or experience. And as I said, I think putting them out on the ground surrounding Ukraine for about 6 weeks didn't help in the freezing cold weather. But seriously, I think they thought it'd be a pushover, just like it was in 2014 with Crimea and the Donbass. But we've got to remember that Ukraine has probably the largest army in Europe. It also has probably the largest air force as well, an air defence system. So they were going up against a country that had learnt a lot of lessons from 2014 and has taken a lot of training and equipment from NATO countries.
Vladimir Putin seems to have been begging for foreign fighters to come and help his cause, foreign fighters to work for nothing. He also seems to be asking for help from China. What do you think the Chinese assistance, supposing they were to offer it, might make as far as a difference to the outcome is concerned?
Well, quite a lot of the Chinese kit basically has been copied from Russian kit, so a lot of it will be compatible. But I think the Chinese will be very wary of being sucked in on the side of Russia. I think it's been a distinct embarrassment for their cast iron allies, as they call them. And of course, the Chinese are actually getting tarred with the same brush as the Russians are. They're an authoritarian government that has aggressive and adventurous tendencies. And of course, Russia hasn't succeeded. And I would think right now in the Indo-Pacific, China's neighbours are looking around saying, well, if that's what Russia did, we need to, A, spend more on defence, and B, get the US in to help us a bit more. So this is a disaster for the authoritarian governments of China, Russia and Iran, because it's thoroughly alerted the free world to the dangers of actually lowering their guard and not spending enough on defence and security.
Just supposing that Vladimir Putin rolls through Ukraine, I mean, he seems to be flattening it, if a little more slowly than perhaps he expected. He rolls through, takes over, unseats the government. Can the Russians actually be a successful occupying force in such a large country?
No, they can't. I mean, people forget this country is the size of the distance between Chicago and New York and Toronto and, say, Raleigh in North Carolina. It's a huge country, and the Ukrainians are thoroughly hacked off with the Russians. Even the pro-Russian speaking ones are all saying, look, we're all Ukrainians now. And all the assessments about how the Russians will be welcomed, particularly in the Russian-speaking and Russian ethnic zones, have proved utterly false. In fact, a leading Moscow think tank very bravely said, the result of this is every Ukrainian is going to hate us now, and we're storing up real trouble for ourselves. And I have to say, Nick, those of you who know the Second World War, Ukrainians can be really quite nasty. and this will be a familiar insurgency pattern, I think. And I think the Western nations were very happy to help it.
So how do you think this is going to pan out then? Are we looking at the beginning of the end, or is this going to be a much longer process?
Well, my own belief, Nick, is it's going to end pretty soon. I think the Russians have lost momentum. I think they've lost the appetite for it. And the sanctions are really going to bite hard pretty soon. The ruble has collapsed. The stock market is all over the place. They can't actually trade in foreign currency at all. This is the world's 11th biggest economy, and we've just applied sanctions across the whole economy. So I reckon the Russians will be looking for a face-saving manoeuvre. As I said, if they can get Odessa and they can knock Kiev on the head, that'll be enough for them, I reckon. And they'll want to then leave Ukraine in bits so that it can't actually pose a threat for the next 20 years or so. I would say in the next 2 weeks we're going to see some progress. I don't believe this occupation force can actually conquer the whole of Ukraine. They don't have enough troops to do that. I don't think they can even surround Kiev, to tell you the truth. So there'll be stalemate. I think, as I said, Putin will want to freeze the conflict and negotiate from strength. But 2 weeks or so, I think it'll be over.
Well, that's a positive note. Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, former NATO commander. So this hour I'm asking you...